We usually think of technological progress as like a mechanical ratchet, you
Yeah,
know?
right.
Like once humanity figures something out, how to forge steel or build a combustion engine or split the atom, that knowledge is just permanently added to our collective hard drive.
Yeah, the ratchet clicks forward and we don't slide back.
Exactly. But today's deep dive, which is guided by a really comprehensive Wikipedia article on Greek fire, is all about a massive, gaping sinkhole in that one-way street.
It really is a fascinating gap in the historical record.
Because our mission today for you, our curious listener, is to figure out how history's most terrifying superweapon, a liquid that literally burned on water, was created.
And how it operated chemically and tactically.
Right, and ultimately how a state secret was guarded so obsessively that its recipe was completely erased from human memory.
Yeah, looking at the sources we have, this weapon represents a staggering paradox. I mean, it was an invention so dominant, it arguably saved the entire Byzantine Empire from total collapse.
Which is saying something.
It is. Yet modern chemists and historians are still trying to reverse engineer its exact composition like 13 centuries later.
It's wild. But to really understand how a weapon like this even comes to exist, we have to look at the pressure cooker of the 7th century.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the Byzantine Empire, which, is just the surviving eastern half of the Roman Empire, is in a state of absolute free fall at this point.
Yeah, the exhaustion of the empire at this moment cannot be overstated. I mean, they had just fought the Byzantine-Sasanian War from 602 to 628.
And that was a brutal slugfest, right?
A multi-decade slugfest with Persia that basically drained their treasury, decimated their professional armies, and just totally ravaged their agricultural base.
So they survived, but they were essentially a hollowed-out shell of a superpower.
Exactly. And nature abhors a vacuum. While the Byzantines and Persians were bleeding each other dry, a massive new geopolitical force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula.
Right, the Muslim conquests.
Yes, and they expand with terrifying speed. Within a single generation, the Byzantines lose their most vital, wealth-generating territories.
So we're talking Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, they all fall.
They all fall. And by around 672 AD, Arab fleets are sailing directly for the imperial capital itself, Constantinople.
Which is terrifying.
Completely. The walls of the city are formidable, but a prolonged siege by a superior naval force would slowly, choke the capital to death. The empire was staring down the barrel of its own extinction.
Which brings us to a refugee named Kallinikos. And this feels almost like a desperate sci-fi movie scenario, right?
Off, though.
Well, the empire is literally on the brink of collapse. The treasury is empty. The enemy fleet is on the horizon. And this lone architect fleeing from Syria shows up at the gates with a blueprint for a superweapon.
It is very cinematic.
Yeah.
And the chronicler Theophanes the Confessor actually credits Kallinikos with bringing this sea fire to the Romans, which they then used to completely devastate the Arab fleets during the first and second sieges of Constantinople.
Wow.
Though, the historical reality of invention is rarely that simple. Historians like James Partington suggest Greek fire was likely the result of collective research.
So not just one lone genius.
Right. Constantinople had inherited the scientific legacy of the Alexandrian chemical school. So Kallinikos might have simply introduced a missing ingredient, or maybe an improved pressurized delivery system, to an incendiary concept the local chemists were already developing.
Got it. Regardless of who filed the medieval patent, though, the deployment was an absolute game changer.
Oh, without a doubt.
So let's put you, the listener, right on the deck of a medieval Byzantine warship to actually experience what it was like to face this thing. First off, forget the name Greek fire.
Yeah, that's a much later term.
Right. If you yelled that in the 8th century, nobody would know what you're talking about.
Exactly. The term Greek fire was coined centuries later by Western crusaders. The Byzantines called themselves Romans.
Right.
So they referred to the weapon as Roman fire, sea fire, or perhaps the most chillingly accurate description, sticky fire.
Sticky fire. Because we aren't talking about lighting a pitch-soaked arrow on fire and shooting it from a bow. This was a pressurized, continuous stream of liquid flame.
It was. They mounted specialized bronze tubes called siphons on the prows of their warships, which were called dromons.
And the visual element of this was just insane. Emperor Alexios had the nozzles of these siphons disguised as the gilded heads of lions and other mythical beasts.
Yeah, the visual and psychological warfare elements were engineered just as carefully as the weapon itself. When the operators triggered the weapon, the continuous stream of fire appeared to be vomited directly from the open jaws of these golden monsters.
That is horrifying.
It gets worse. Surviving accounts describe an overwhelming sensory assault. There was deafening roar, like a thunder that accompanied the spray.
And huge plumes of thick, blinding black smoke, right?
Yes. And the most terrifying property of all, it ignited and continued to burn directly on the surface of the ocean.
Wait, on the water?
On the water. Throwing water on a petroleum-based fire actually makes it significantly worse.
Oh, right, because it boils.
Exactly. The water instantly boils, turning to steam, which expands and splatters the burning oil over a much wider area. If your ship was it, and you instinctively dove into the sea to save yourself,
Which is what anyone would do.
right, you would find that the surface of the water itself was ablaze.
That is just nightmarish. And the sources list only 3 ways to extinguish it once it's stuck to a surface, right? Smothering it with sand, dousing it in strong vinegar, or pouring old urine over it.
Yes, old urine.
Wait, old urine. Imagine the sheer sensory overload of this battlefield for you. You're dodging liquid fire from a brass lion head. The ocean is literally burning.
The noise is deafening.
Exactly. And your only defense mechanism is frantically splashing yourself and your shipmates with old urine and vinegar. The smell alone must have been apocalyptic.
The psychological impact alone would shatter the morale of an attacking fleet before the physical damage even took hold. The smell, the noise, the impossible sight of burning water, it was apocalyptic.
I am struggling to buy one part of this history, though.
Once that,
Well, if this weapon was deployed for centuries, from the 600s all the way to the 1200s, how is it possible their enemies never stole it? I mean, if I'm an Arab or Bulgar naval commander, my entire operational goal is to capture one of these fire ships intact and reverse engineer it. It's basically 9th century plumbing. How hard could it be to take a nozzle apart?
that assumption is exactly what the Byzantines anticipated, and it's why Greek fire is, honestly, a masterclass in medieval information security.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't treat it as a simple chemical recipe. It was a highly complex, compartmentalized system. You couldn't just capture a ship and start spraying fire.
But didn't they capture them?
They did. In 812 and 814, the Bulgars captured 36 siphons and large quantities of the liquid. In 827, the Arabs captured a fully intact fire ship.
And they still couldn't use it. This is basically the medieval equivalent of nuclear launch codes.
That's a great analogy.
I mean, you could steal the nuclear missile, but without the launch pad, the encrypted codes, and the trained engineers, you just have a giant, very dangerous paperweight.
The paperweight analogy is spot on, especially regarding the danger. Let's look at the physics of what they were trying to do.
Okay.
You have a highly volatile, highly flammable liquid. To get it to spray out of a nozzle over a long distance, you have to pressurize it.
Right.
But cold crude oil is incredibly thick and sludgy. So to make it flow through a pump and ignite easily, you have to heat it.
Wait, heating a sealed, pressurized vat of volatile petroleum on a wooden ship, what could possibly go wrong?
Everything could go wrong. If the Arabs captured a ship and tried to operate the siphon without knowing the exact temperature tolerances or the specific valve timing or the internal mechanics of the double-acting force pump,
The pressure would just build up.
yes, and the entire tank would detonate, blowing their own ship to splinters.
Wow.
The knowledge of how to cast the bronze valves, how to mix the chemicals, and how to navigate the specialized drum-on ships were all kept in entirely different silos. The brass workers didn't know the chemistry.
And the chemists didn't know the pump mechanics.
Yeah.
And the state reinforced this compartmentalization with heavy-handed propaganda, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitos literally wrote a manual for his son, instructing him to never, under any circumstances, reveal the secret.
Didn't he say an angel gave it to them?
He did. He seeded the myth that the recipe was handed down by an angel to the first Christian emperor, and that anyone who dared to share it would be struck down by a flame from heaven.
Which is a pretty effective NDA.
State chronicles even recorded a highly convenient story of a corrupt official who tried to sell the secret to an enemy and was supposedly struck by lightning as he walked into a church.
Incredible deterrent against espionage. But the ultimate consequence of siloing information that aggressively is that you eventually hide it from yourself.
Yes.
Which brings us to the modern era, where scholars and chemists have had to play historical CSI to figure out what's actually inside those golden lion heads.
It's been a long process of elimination.
Let's walk the listener through the debunked theories, because the chemistry here is just fascinating. Theory number 1, it was an early form of gunpowder based on saltpeter.
Right. The French school of chemists pushed the saltpeter theory really hard in the 19th century. They read the ancient descriptions of thunder and smoke and immediately assumed an explosive discharge.
Makes sense on paper.
It does, but chemically and historically it falls apart. Saltpeter acts as an oxidizer. When you ignite it, it causes a rapid combustion that results in an explosion, a blast that propelled a projectile.
And Greek fire wasn't a blast.
No, it was a slow, continuous stream of burning liquid. Furthermore, saltpeter doesn't even appear in the military texts of Europe or the Middle East before the 13th century.
So the timeline doesn't fit at all. Okay, theory number 2 is even more creative, quicklime.
Quicklime is an interesting one.
Because the defining characteristic of quicklime, which is calcium oxide, is that it produces a massive exothermic reaction when it comes into contact with water. So a weapon that burns on the ocean. Quicklime sounds like the perfect culprit.
It really does, until you look at the physics of a large body of water.
Right.
An exothermic reaction requires heat to build upon itself. If you dump a quicklime mixture into the open, churning, freezing ocean, the water acts as a massive heat sink.
Oh, it cools it down too fast.
Exactly. It dissipates the thermal energy far too quickly to create the roaring, continuous surface fire described in the texts. Additionally, Emperor Leo VI's military manual explicitly describes Greek fire being poured directly onto the dry wooden decks of enemy ships and being used in land sieges where water wasn't present at all. Quicklime needs water to react, so it cannot be the primary incendiary agent.
That makes total sense. Then there is theory number 3, calcium phosphide. You supposedly create this by boiling animal bones in urine inside a sealed vessel, which produces a compound that spontaneously ignites when it touches water.
It is a brilliant piece of speculative chemistry, obviously, but modern empirical testing completely ruled it out. Extensive laboratory experiments utilizing calcium phosphide could only produce brief, weak flashes of flame.
So not a roaring inferno.
No, it failed entirely to replicate the intense 1,000-degree fire that melted enemy ships.
So if those 3 are out, what is the actual modern consensus?
The prevailing consensus is that Greek fire was essentially a medieval form of napalm. The base ingredient was naturally occurring crude oil or refined petroleum known as naphtha.
Where did they get it?
Well, the Byzantines controlled territories around the Black Sea that had naturally seeping oil wells.
Okay, but raw petroleum is too thin and runny to use in a flamethrower, right? If you spray it, it disperses into a mist and burns out instantly.
Exactly. They needed a thickener.
Hence, sticky fire.
Precisely. They mixed the naphtha with organic resins, likely pine tar or animal fat. The resin fundamentally altered the physics of the weapon. It thickened the fluid so it could be shot in a cohesive stream.
Right.
It dramatically increased the duration and temperature of the burn, and it allowed the blazing liquid to stick tenaciously to wooden hulls and human targets.
And we don't just have to guess about this, which is the coolest part. In 2002, historian John Heldon actually built a full-scale working replica of the Byzantine siphon system.
He did, for a television documentary.
Right. They used ancient texts to reverse engineer a bronze force pump, a swivel nozzle, and a brazier to heat the mixture of crude oil and wood resins.
And the results of that experiment were both validating and completely terrifying.
Right.
Even with modern welding techniques, the replica was incredibly dangerous to operate due to the extreme pressure and volatile vapors.
But when they got it working?
When they got it working, it shot a cohesive stream of fire up to 15 meters, nearly 50 feet.
That's incredible.
The flame temperature exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. It instantly destroyed the target ship they had built.
Wait, I have a question about the resources, though. If the primary ingredient is just crude oil, and the Middle East is literally famous for its oil reserves, why couldn't the Arab fleets just make their own version?
That's a great question. I mean, they had the fuel naturally bubbling up from the ground. The Arabs were absolutely utilizing petroleum in warfare. The Abbasid Caliphate had specialized military units called Nafatun. These soldiers wore fireproof suits and hurled small copper vessels filled with burning oil.
Like medieval Molotov cocktails.
Essentially, yes.
Yes.
But they never replicated the continuous stream of the Byzantine siphon. They had the raw naphtha, sure, but they lacked the specific resin thickeners that made it viscous enough to shoot. And crucially, they lacked the highly specialized bronze working and fluid dynamics engineering to pressurize a heated tank of oil safely.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the difference between throwing a firecracker and building a ballistic missile.
Exactly.
But even as an engineering marvel, Greek fire had serious tactical limitations. I mean, a 15-meter range is incredibly short. On the open ocean, that is basically hand-to-hand combat range.
The strict operational parameters were its biggest weakness. You could only deploy the siphon ships safely in relatively calm seas. If the water was too choppy, the operators couldn't maintain the pressure or aim the nozzle.
And wind, right.
Very wind-dependent. If the wind suddenly shifted and blew back toward the Byzantine ship as they fired, a 1,000-degree sticky liquid would blow right back onto their own deck.
That is a massive design flaw. And their enemies adapted, right? Human beings don't just sit there and let themselves be incinerated for 5 centuries.
No, they don't. The Muslim navies figured out the 15-meter kill zone and adjusted their tactics to stay out of range.
That's smart.
They also developed physical countermeasures. They started draping their hulls in thick felt or animal hides that had been heavily soaked in vinegar to resist the flames.
Wow. And this arms race forced the Byzantines to shrink the technology, didn't it?
It did. Emperor Leo VI reputedly oversaw the invention of kerosiphones.
Which were?
They were essentially portable, handheld flamethrowers resembling giant syringes.
A medieval infantry flamethrower. That is wild.
They utilized them heavily in land warfare, mounting them on siege towers to clear defenders from city walls. They also expanded into secondary munitions, like filling ceramic grenades with the naphtha mixture.
And didn't they cover those in spikes?
Yes, caltrops. Sharp, multi-pointed metal spikes on the outside of the clay pots. If an enemy soldier stepped on the grenade, it would maim their foot.
Ouch.
And if they bent down to try and dislodge it, the clay would shatter and ignite the liquid fire.
It is just brilliant, ruthless military engineering. But then the timeline of this weapon hits a brick wall.
A very sudden brick wall.
By the time of the Fourth Crusade in 1203, when Constantinople is famously besieged and sacked by a Latin Christian army, Greek fire is completely absent from the historical record. The city falls, and the superweapon is just nowhere to be found.
The sudden disappearance is one of the most debated mysteries of the medieval period. There are several compounding factors.
Like what?
Well, in the decades leading up to 1203, the Byzantine Empire underwent a period of significant military decline and disarmament. They may have simply lost the infrastructure to mass-produce the siphons.
Oh, that makes sense.
Furthermore, they lost control of key territories around the Black Sea, which likely cut off their supply to the specific crude oil seeps and pine resins required for the mixture.
But it seems to me that its biggest strength, that absolute obsessive secrecy, was actually its fatal flaw.
How do you mean?
By compartmentalizing the knowledge so tightly, the Byzantines basically guaranteed they would eventually erase it from their own history.
That's a very perceptive point.
If only 2 families in the entire empire know how to forge the pump valves, and only 1 guild knows the exact ratio of the chemical mixture.
All it takes is one localized plague.
Exactly. Or 1 political purge by a paranoid emperor, and that entire chain of knowledge is permanently broken.
The irony is profound. In their absolute obsession with keeping the knowledge from their enemies, the Byzantine state virtually guaranteed that they would erase the technology from their own history. And there is actually a bizarre 19th century coda to this entire saga that perfectly illustrates that danger of hoarding knowledge.
Oh, really? What happened?
So, hundreds of years after the Byzantine Empire fell, the Ottoman Empire controls Constantinople. And a man named Cavafian, an Armenian subject of the empire, approaches the Ottoman authorities, claiming he has successfully rediscovered the lost chemical recipe for Greek fire.
Wait, really? Did he actually have it, or was he a con artist?
According to the reports of the era, he conducted demonstrations that genuinely convinced the Ottoman military brass that he had recreated the substance.
Okay.
But Cavafian refused to document the chemical formula or hand it over to the state. He demanded that he personally command the fire ships during actual naval engagements.
So he wanted to be the sole keeper of the black box. He was doing exactly what the Byzantine emperors did.
Precisely the same mistake. And the Ottoman imperial government, deciding they had absolutely no interest in being held hostage by a single man's secret, took a much more brutal approach.
Let me guess.
They had Cavafian poisoned.
Wow.
He died, taking his reverse-engineered secret to the grave, ensured the recipe was lost to history a second time.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a lot to process today. We've traced the arc of an exhausted empire on the brink of annihilation, saved by a highly pressurized stream of burning crude oil.
We explored the physics of heating volatile liquids, the chemistry of quicklime and naphtha,
and the extreme lengths a state will go to protect its greatest asset.
The fundamental lesson of Greek fire is a stark reminder about the fragility of human knowledge. We take for granted that information is cumulative,
Right.
but complex systems require continuous maintenance, shared understanding, and institutional memory. When you hyper-compartmentalize a technology, you make it incredibly brittle.
Which should make you look at the modern world a little differently. Just look at the highly classified, incredibly compartmentalized technologies we rely on today for global security.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought.
Right. I mean, if our current systems were to face a sudden societal collapse, could our most advanced defense networks and algorithms become the Greek fire of the future?
Just myths that our descendants know existed but are utterly incapable of recreating.
Exactly. The mechanical ratchet of progress doesn't always click forward. Sometimes it slips. And what was once the pinnacle of human engineering becomes nothing more than smoke on the water.